Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Healthtech Pigeon podcast episode. I am James, and I've got Jessica with me from the SomX team, and we are, well, it's the last one of the year, so we're going to chat about some happenings in the health tech world in the UK. God, some stuff, a heck of some stuff going on in the US at the minute that we can just have a brief chat about what that might mean for healthcare broadly and startups and tech and all that sort of stuff. Chat about that. And yeah, obviously there's a load more AI stories this week, as there have been all year. So maybe we'll have a chat about what's been going on in AI and what we can expect for next year. And God, like, I'm sick of, to be honest, I'm sick of saying the term, like I'm sick of saying AI. But we'll talk a bit more about it before the end of the year. Hey, so yeah, how you doing, Jess? All right.
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry for everyone who was expecting a bit of a break from me for a few weeks. That was fake news. I'm back, got bored, and but I promise I will be away for at least a few weeks before I come back and take over the microphone again. But definitely the last you hear of me for 2014. 2014? That it shows you exactly where my brain is. I'm going to stop talking, but I'm fine.
Great. Thank you for that. Cool. Let's dive into some stories. So I guess the first thing to talk about this week, although we've not got a particular story to point to here, it's just everything going on in the US. The CEO of United Healthcare was shot, and just the general uproar and just conversations around the US healthcare system that have started. I think being on TikTok has been a really just interesting place with the narrative and everything going on, and particularly the comments sections I have found fascinating on TikTok, because you've got narratives on narratives on narratives. But I'd say one of the most interesting things that I guess learned about US healthcare, and I know that we have some US listeners on this podcast that this will be preaching to the choir on, but there's been a fascinating, almost philosophical debate going on in a lot of these comment sections about, yeah, okay, a CEO has been shot and killed. What about all of the killing that organization has done? Which is a very bold thing to say. But so many of the comments have been, well, this insurance company has prevented my relative getting this treatment and they died. This other insurance company has prevented this person getting this treatment and they died. And there's a narrative going on about, well, you know, this CEO has come in and the amount of claims that have been denied has increased to over 30%. Therefore, there are so much more deaths responsible by this person. And there's been just such a volume of people describing obviously the negative impacts of the insurance system and how it works. The fact that when a doctor, you know, actually Dr. Disney, who I had on my podcast, Peter, he did a really interesting TikTok about this, about a video about this, about literally describing how a doctor can prescribe a treatment. He can prescribe a treatment or expect to prescribe a treatment and then has to justify it to an insurance company who can take a view. And he's had to say, well, there are guidelines. I'm following guidelines. This is treatment that's evidence-based. And still that just isn't a guaranteed yes. That based on the investigations, based on the clinical evidence, insurance companies still have the right to say no. I'll be honest and say that I hadn't quite grasped that as a reality of the US healthcare system. I hadn't quite grasped so much of the emotive nature of it and the power that those companies have to veto certain treatments. And I guess my overwhelming reflection on it is that whilst we talk about the problems that we have in the UK with the NHS and our healthcare system, it makes you very, very glad that we aren't dealing with that. And that's not to say we don't have problems, but at least we feel aligned on, I guess, the way that we investigate and treat people. And again, like a story that I'll share. So my mum got diagnosed with glaucoma, and I had to go in and get some eye tests myself because I run high intraocular pressure, which is obviously a risk factor and all these different things. And so I had a private appointment to an ophthalmologist because we have health insurance through our company. And so I went to go and see the ophthalmologist, and they did a load of tests. And the ophthalmologist, the professor of ophthalmology, and I sat and had a conversation afterwards where it was like, well, your pressure's running a bit high. Do you want to do anything about it? Okay, what are the options? Well, these are the options. Like, you could have this laser thing, which will drop your pressures for 5 years. You could have this, you could have this. But he was like, ultimately, if it was me, I'd probably just do nothing for a year, and we'll just test you next year, and that'll be that. And it was like, okay, cool. It was just a very collaborative conversation where we've decided what to do. In no way, shape, or form was money ever part of that. It wasn't like I was being forced into a laser treatment route because it's a fee for service and it's profitable and all those things. And similarly, because, you know, again, that being paid for by an insurance company, fortunately, you know, the insurance that we have, like Amit Patel started Peachy, and that's the insurance that we have. Similarly, you know, a few texts back and forth, and all of a sudden that's sorted. So the experience that I've had even in the UK of a private system is not, you know, the extent that we're dealing with, or at least seeing in the comment sections, which I can, you know, not evidence-based, but just very, very, very different, and makes me very grateful of the system that we have in the UK. I think the final thing that I will say is that in the US, after an election that largely divided the country, the Democrats, the Republicans, one of the things that I have seen is a lot of agreement and just, I guess, a feeling of unity in a lot of these comment sections against the common enemy, which seems to be the structure of their healthcare system, which I think in some regards is needed. But, you know, let's not forget a man has died. So a lot of people would argue so have lots of other people. But yeah, interesting box of frogs that to analyse. Don't know how qualified we are to analyse it, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Jess.
Eminently unqualified is what I will say, and probably worth issuing a trigger warning to say that if you're not up for a philosophical discussion today, then maybe tune in next year, because I think that this is where it's going. But I think these are big conversations that are going on, and yes, you know, obviously all of that is happening over in the US, but I do think that it has like a ripple effect on how we think about healthcare, and also just what happens around the world in other countries too. And I think it's a real story of, I guess, two parallels, as you said, where, you know, you can't forget that someone has died here, but what it has done is given rise to people to be much more vocal than I have ever seen, and critical of a system that is not working. And I think, yeah, that video from Dr. Disney really blew my mind, where he was explaining how, I think he'd basically issued a set of diagnostics on a child. Let's not forget, this is also a child. It's not even an adult. Not that that makes it any more or less justifiable, but it was a child. He'd run a set of diagnostics, and he was having a conversation with a doctor who was a representative from the insurance company, and having to go through and justify why he'd run those diagnostics to a doctor. And he was clearly quite emotive and distressed to a point, sharing this story where he was just saying, like, what ethical baseline are we operating from now, where, or I'm doing essentially the bare minimum. I'm going by the guidelines. I'm doing what my duty is as a doctor, and that's now being queried that I should be doing less than that, purely based on economics and commercial values, not based on the value of human life and a child's life at that. And I think, you know, you can hear in, you know, his story and his voice, you know, the experiences of so many other doctors and clinicians globally, I think, where, you know, we talk often a lot about people going into these roles as a vocation, and that we have entire systems that people's health and lives are reliant on, but they're very reliant on the goodwill of the people who hold them up, and that's clearly wearing very thin in so many directions, and it's showing lots and lots of holes. I think you're so right as well. Like, it does, we can wax lyrical about the issues over here in the NHS and, start from scratch, let's build something new, all the issues we're facing with funding and that sort of thing. But the truth of the matter is that, for better or worse, we can turn up at the front door of the health system and get some kind of care and support. And I've seen a lot of videos about people where, they've priced up how much it would be to call an ambulance in the US, having to make the choice about whether or not to do that or whether or not to eat. And, a few weeks ago, we thought that I was in labour, and it was never a discussion about, can we afford to go or should we go? We just went straight to the hospital and was admitted to the maternity triage unit, and we were seen and told it was fine. Obviously, the baby starts moving again, does his thing, and we come home. But that was never part of the equation, and that was in a good health scenario. When you're in a scenario where someone's having a heart attack or that kind of thing, that should just, in my opinion, that just shouldn't ever really be part of the equation. And I think I certainly, on a personal level, forget that for a lot of people around the world it very much is, and I think it's very easy to take for granted what we do have. But yeah, there's, I suppose, no perfect system. I do just think, though, that, as you say, this situation, this conversation that's happening now is incredibly interesting timing against the backdrop of the change in presidency. A lot of the narrative we're seeing coming from Trump, seeing, from RFK Jr. I think ultimately what we might see in the next 12 months and, 5 years, maybe even beyond, is, if you look at the US, the two biggest healthcare establishments, Big Pharma and health insurers, being put under the spotlight. And I don't know necessarily what will happen, but I think something's going to happen. And I think the powers that be, albeit Trump and his advisors, will make changes. I wouldn't be able to say whether they were good or bad changes, but I do think that they seem motivated to do something. And what will the fallout be? What will the ripple effect be for other countries? Will they be sitting up and listening? Will we see, impacts from an industry or sector perspective? Will it make other governments rethink the way that perhaps they're engaging with those kinds of corporate organisations, but also how they manage their health systems? I don't know. Or, will it also give governments like the UK, for example, the opportunity to stand up and say, we are actually getting something right here? And, again, we've had a Labour government come in who have gone very heavy on what they want to do with healthcare. That's a huge priority for them. They've not shied away from that. They're going hard. So it's an opportunity for them to almost kind of stand up and be counted and really kind of put themselves at the forefront of, this is the way to run healthcare in the most equitable and morally appropriate way that ultimately serves a population, but individuals too. And that's not to say I think they're going to get everything right. They're not. They are also a government. Things are clunky. But I just think it's such a huge time for change. And these conversations, I think, are going to create fire.
Yeah, the conversations are going nowhere. This isn't a story that's going to disappear overnight. This is almost feeling like a bit of a movement. It's feeling like there's so many people talking about this in so many different ways that this is going to develop. And you're right. I also just wonder what the effect will be. It's impossible to ignore politically because of the people involved, because of the companies involved. They're the biggest insurers, pharma. It's outrageous. And people have described some I guess commentators or doomsday scenarioists have, called it, this, what you're looking at is end stage capitalism. Like, this is where if you don't cap capitalism in the right places and you let it take over things like healthcare, this is what happens, where the rich get richer, people get denied life-saving treatment, anger, unrest, and then something big happens. It's difficult to ignore, like, these narratives. Like, that's kind of playing out. And you're right. I think in the UK, where we've had Conservative government for a long time, and a lot of talk about insidious privatisation of the NHS, this is a moment in time with something very clear to point to, a scenario, a situation, even a specific event. You can point to this and go, well, actually, we need to jump back a bit here. Like, let's just put something here. This is what we don't want. This is where we don't want to go. This is absolutely what we don't want to do. And you're right, that can justify the funding of what we have in a public healthcare system, and frankly, keeping capitalism out of healthcare as much as possible. Let it remain a right, not a privilege. Let it be in the hands of people that aren't motivated commercially. Because, we're not experts, but just as observers of what's going on over on that side, this is what you're looking at is just what we don't want. It's what we innately just reject as UK trained clinicians. Like, we just reject this. Any talk of profit or money and stuff is so uncomfortable on the ground floor of healthcare. Even in that scenario where I'm seeing an ophthalmologist for a private health, situation, they're just not trying to make me spend more money, just because of the integrity that the clinicians are taught. And listening to Dr. Disney, that's the same integrity that those clinicians are dealing with on that side, because they're the ones with hands-on patients. It just has to go through this layer of insurers with commercial interests, and it sucks. But you're right, it's what we don't want. And if we are going to draw positive, then perhaps it's that. Perhaps it's that we at least have a model that we know we don't want in the UK, and politically that can drive people to decisions around keeping a public healthcare system for as long as possible and optimising it so that it sticks around.
It's interesting what you say, though, about capitalism and healthcare, because I'm intrigued to understand more, and I probably can go and do some reading to find out about this, but Trump's advisors, apparently there are more billionaires within that group of people than there ever have been. And so I'm really intrigued to understand what his motivations and their motivations will be, because it kind of feels like almost a bit of a dichotomy, where you have this group of billionaires, and don't get me wrong, they're not all going to be having a voice in healthcare, but you have an incredibly wealthy group of people, predominantly wealthy men, who are also coming out and making these statements about Big Pharma. I haven't seen any statements necessarily about health insurance yet. That's not to say they haven't been made. I just haven't seen them. If they have, but I think, they will likely say something. I don't think they can ignore this. But yeah, I'm interested to know and understand, because that feels very, at odds with each other, or odds with what you would perhaps expect. And I think, fundamentally Trump is a businessman at the end of the day. And so that is where his experience is.
Yeah, so I listened to his entire Joe Rogan interview, and I've listened to a few other bits. It's a really interesting one about motivation. I think national pride is something that he has, and wanting the US to be seen as the best nation no matter what. But what you said, you're a businessman, that came across massively. Like, it seemed like the only reason he doesn't want to go to war is because it's expensive. There's better ways to spend the money to make the US better, and that definitely came across for me. Just on the capitalism and healthcare thing, there's a strange, it is a very, very, very strange couple of things to put together, because capitalism will drive innovation through incentives and change, and individuals can elevate themselves through entrepreneurship, and you can create value and innovation and moving things forward and all that kind of stuff. I think in healthcare, it's difficult, because as soon as you involve patient outcomes into that equation, you can't put value and price on living for a year, living for 6 months, living for 5. You can place value on living with a condition based on how much that condition then costs for the rest of your life. But then someone living an extra 6 months, it's bizarre. It's bizarre, because that inherently is difficult to price into the equation. You're only really pricing what their costs are by living for another 6 months. So it's very difficult for an insurance company to then turn around and go, like, make a decision to fund CAR T therapy. Because you've put an insurance layer in, right? Someone's got insurance with United Healthcare or a different one, and they need CAR T therapy, and it's gonna be potentially curative, or a different type of therapy that might just extend their life for 6 months, but it costs $400K. So that insurance company has now got decisions to make. Do they fund the 400K off their P&L straight into costs? They're not feeling the value then of that person living. So capitalism in that equation doesn't work, because you're going to drive, like, if that's always going to be a cost, then you're going to drive innovation to drive that cost downwards, to then mean that is then accepted more. So, but then there's the saying, no, but like, I don't know, I guess I don't know enough about it, but like, when it's not treated in that way, when it's treated on, okay, NICE in the UK, NICE has, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence has said that on balance, this is the pathway. These are the treatments. When this is the situation, we do this. And they have said that that's, effective across a population, and that is what it is. To then throw an insurance layer in that can just say no for whatever reason, or put pressure on, or contest, or all those things, it just doesn't, like, I don't know, and I don't see how that system just makes sense.
Although that said, regulators, when they're approving new medicines, that equation is factored in.
Cost, yeah, okay, health economics,
the value of someone living an extra 6 months, and that kind of thing, that is factored in at that point. But I get what you're saying, that it becomes all the more complex when you add an insurer into that. And I have just remembered as well that recent thing that's come out where some of the insurers have basically said that if you're in the US, if you have a procedure that lasts over X amount of time, then they don't cover your anaesthetic. Can you imagine that?
This was bizarre.
I mean, I haven't read enough about it to really make an informed. I mean, I don't know if you need to read about it to make an informed opinion, but instinctively, that just feels so wrong. That, like, clearly, if you're under anaesthetic for a long time, you've got something quite serious going on, and yeah, it's just mind-boggling. Like, that's going to be quite a significant procedure that you're having, and then an additional cost that you're then having to factor in. That means you may not have that, which could be a potentially life-saving procedure. It's
quite interesting, because I think all of these things fall under the same bracket, which is that you're just questioning the integrity of the clinicians. On the anaesthetics thing, right? The example that you said, if an anaesthetic lasts too long, then it's not covered, and therefore it's like forcing people to deliver anaesthetic in a certain amount of time. Like, it's bizarre. But I can remember when I was training as an anaesthetist, that obviously anaesthetic gas has a cost to it. And so when you're put under anaesthetic, it's a drug, you're given 20 mils of propofol or whatever that sends you under, but then you're kept under anaesthesia with gas, which is in the anaesthetic machine in the operating theatre. And obviously that gas has a cost. So the idea and the integrity of the clinician generally is to run as little gas as possible. And that's not to keep you light in anesthesia and not put you too deep in anesthesia. It's not that. It's that anesthetic machines have a flow element. So the speed that you're putting the gas in affects the speed that you can change how light or deep someone's anesthetic is. And so a less experienced anaesthetist might have more periods where they really increase the flow so they can change a lot of things quickly. A more experienced anaesthetic, and I can remember there was one anaesthetist, and it was almost like a game to him of just how little anaesthetic gas can he possibly deliver whilst maintaining a safe anaesthetic the entire way through. I remember him saying to me, he's like, the thing is, James, you've got to remember that anaesthetic gases have a cost and the NHS needs to save money, and good anaesthetists will not use loads and loads and loads of anaesthetic gas and massively up their flows, because more experienced anaesthetists should know what's going on in the surgery and should be able to plan accordingly. And that's the value of experience. That's what being a good, as part of what being a good anaesthetist is. And that's an opinion. It's not an opinion that maybe every anaesthetist on the planet will hold. But like, that's, again, just those speaks to the integrity of the clinicians, that they are going to feel that of the healthcare system, that they're not going to want to waste, that they are still, though, going to balance that with safety. And I think where you've got then insurance companies that are then saying, well, the anaesthetic has to be this amount of time. First of all, that's really reductive. And they've probably said that like maybe on averaging the amount of anaesthetic gas and other things and operating theatre time and all these things that they can attribute costs to. I still think it's reductive to just say time is the factor that influences cost, although it probably, if you add things all up, it probably is the most driving factor or whatever. I think it's reductive, but I think all of these things question the integrity of the clinician. And just listening to Dr. Disney stuff, it's exhausting. It is exhausting for those clinicians to have their integrity questioned so often. I know it's exhausting for trainees in the UK to have your integrity questioned, to even have to do the volume of assessments that you have to do, and like all the stupid tick boxes that we have to do in the UK. That's nothing compared to like having every single decision that you make looked at by multiple doctors and lawyers, and potentially having your patients then switched off a life-saving treatment because you've not dotted an I across the T or whatever. Like, it's, yeah, I think, I don't know, it starts to get me fired up when I think about this sort of stuff, because it just seems deeply unpleasant. What I will say though, all of this stuff is now in the zeitgeist. Now we're talking about it. Now we're really putting this stuff under the microscope. Because I've not looked at it in this amount of detail before. I've not had to feel that fired up about it for being on this side. But actually, you're absolutely right what you said earlier, that now we're really getting a look at where we could be with, insidious privatisation of the NHS and all these things. That's the end stage of it. That's where it leads. And we do not want to be headed there whatsoever.
I completely get what you're saying. And I also think that it puts a huge amount of pressure on a patient as well, because ultimately, I think there's something about clinicians being put under pressure perhaps to do procedures more quickly, but actually for patients, it's that not being able to have a procedure if it's going to be X amount of time. And that could be the decision between, life-saving or not. And, not quite the same thing, because it's not, well, it's in part, I suppose, related to health insurances, like pricing of insulin and all of that sort of thing, where I've seen so many videos of people who are having to self-titrate up and down on their insulin medication to make it last longer, or risk going without it because they can't afford to eat and to have their insulin. And you have to ask questions when appreciating that social media is a bubble. In particular, the media is a bubble. You're always going to hear about the worst and the biggest headlines. Of course you are. But you do, as you said, it's a good thing that we're talking about it, because I think, appreciate conversation only gets you so far, but conversation is the start point of that. And I guess on a more positive note, and let's move the conversation onto more positive things. I think one thing I have really noticed this year that I've found so encouraging is that I've felt like it has been a real year of advocacy. And what I mean by that is that I've felt this kind of cohesion that I haven't necessarily seen or felt to this extent before, where and maybe it's because of the challenges that we've faced, both politically, both systemically, over however many years. But I really just feel like I've noticed people advocating for each other, organisations advocating for each other, coming together and pushing forward to make positive change in a really active way. More so than just, let's just keep talking about it so that something happens and hope that somebody else does do something. And I felt that, I would say, like that kind of undercurrent that will carry into next year. And I think that through what has been a tough couple of years, and, you know, people expected this year to be not quite as tough as it was, I think that's the thing that really has carried people through and is giving people optimism for what's to come over the next couple of years, particularly here in the UK. And, you know, at the Google and SomX Healthtech Talks Christmas party, we did a potluck panel where we just pulled people out from the audience to ask about the things.
A very high risk maneuver at an event that we were hosting. Very high risk that I was not on board with, just for the record, but ended up being very good.
Rude.
So
how rude! Where's the trust?
No.
Where is the trust?
I'm being honest. I'm being honest. The chances of that going well, I thought, were not high enough for me to be comfortable. That's the most diplomatic way that I can put it, but it turned out very well, so I ate my words in the end.
This is the first time I'm hearing of these concerns, probably for the best. But yeah, I mean, it did work well.
Why do you think I didn't stand at the front? I was like, your decision. You
weren't invited. Just kidding. Back to the main point. We did a potluck panel and we just pulled on people from the community to talk about some of the things that they were really proud of or had been excited about this year and things that they're optimistic about for next year. And I think, to be honest, that's where I feel like I want to centre myself for the moment amidst all of this chaos. I think it's clear that healthcare is going to become more political than it ever has been. But yeah, that kind of momentum, that feeling of togetherness and cohesion, I think is a really positive sign of what we can expect to see going into next year. And, you know, conversations, for example, around, funding female founders, for example. I'm starting to see things actually happening. And I think we're still going to be bandying about that 2% statistic for a while yet. But there are things that are happening, people who are trying to do things. Health inequity as well. I feel like, you know, there's so many initiatives out there who are pushing things forward. It's clearly on the agenda of this government. Hopefully they're consulting with and being advised by the right people and partnering with the right organisations to make the positive change that needs to happen. And even if I think back to the debate that we had at Leaders in Healthcare, the event that Jack Reindler hosted, which was actually about clinical trials and all of that kind of thing. Much of that was centred on, like, how do we do better with data and with research to get better representation, get treatments to people quicker, and utilise the tools and resources we have, but make better use of data, and make the right decisions at the right time, make things faster, make things better. And it's a nice feeling towards the end of the year, I suppose.
How else do you feel about, like, the year in women's health? You've sort of done the unofficial women's health segment on every one of these podcasts almost. So, like, through the year, I don't know, how do you feel about the progress in women's health over this year beyond what you've already just said?
I always have to caveat this with saying that I exist in a bubble, which is that there is a real bubble of, like, positivity and energy, and I'm surrounded by people who are doing really amazing things. I think where we've had those huge raises coming from Flow, the Maven Clinic, I think those are really positive indicators. And I think for whatever people's opinions are of the nuance of those situations, I think it's a positive sign. And I think I feel encouraged because one of the conversations I'm starting to hear more of is around the conversations for women's health, female founders. They whilst they're not the same thing, they tend to intersect. But previously, that has been very tribal in the sense that it's been women for women, and that has definitely started to extend out to look at how the role that allyship plays there, and lots of men, for example, asking about how can I be a part of this and support the momentum and be a part of the conversation in a way that's meaningful, that is safe. And I don't think we necessarily are there yet and have created those spaces necessarily, but I'm encouraged by those conversations starting to happen, because I think that there's more recognition that it's not just a women's problem, it's an everyone problem. And similarly, I think like moving from like women's health and men's health to more of an encapsulation of what I would call family health, and I don't mean necessarily in a nuclear family kind of setup, but recognizing that, you know, different genders need different support and are faced by different challenges, that actually there's a role for everyone to play there. And what's affecting men is also having a knock-on effect for women, and what's affecting women definitely has a huge effect for men and their families and the communities that they're in. And, you know, it's an everyone problem. And I think there is growing recognition of that, which is really, encouraging. But I think one thing I would just like to see, I suppose, with the new plan that the government published, this new 10-year plan, is just where the chips fall, where that plan rolls out, and what that means for women's health, but also, I guess, the intersectionality of that with health inequities, knowing that, you know, women are not a homogenous group, men are also not a homogenous group, but actually, you know, there are spaces and places where we really need to be focusing energy within that. And how are we doing it? And are we putting our money where our mouth is? That huge budget that was announced, how are we actually going to spend it to make change where it really needs to happen? And I think my hope also for women's health next year is a big conversation we always have here, but again, we had on that panel, was where we have these kind of frontier technologies that ultimately are generally accessed with people who have disposable income and therefore fit a certain demographic. How can we move from somewhere like that to where the people who can really benefit get access to and benefit from those kinds of frontier technologies without just relying on the trickle down, because that takes too long. And actually, arguably, it does even happen because is it just exacerbating a gap? So even if you have a bit of trickle down, it's offset by an exacerbation anyway. So that would be my hope. But I think also one thing that I have been really heartened by is there's always loads of discussion about lack of integration of health tech into healthcare and slow adoption and all that kind of thing. And what I will say is my journey through pregnancy has really shown me where we're doing great things with health tech and where I'm engaging with technology in ways that I wouldn't have expected to through the health system and otherwise, and how beneficial that has been to that experience. Even as simple as, apart from with a COVID vaccine passport, I haven't really engaged with the NHS app before, but it's been incredibly helpful. And I get letters immediately after a consultation telling me when my next consultation is, and I'm not waiting around for information. Like it is genuinely at my fingertips. You know, that my Badger app, for example, has got all of my diagnostics and our child's diagnostics in there, or like, you know, all of it's got my care summary in there, so I can go back. I've been tracking all of the the measurements and all of that sort of thing. That gives me so much reassurance. And so I think because I've been much more engaged perhaps in the health system, it's shown me all the different places where we have made progress and where technology is making a difference, even if it's on a really foundational and basic level. But I just hadn't appreciated that before. And then when you layer on top of that the different apps and things that, I use anyway, whether that's through my Apple Watch or whether that's a period tracker or a pregnancy tracker, there's been so many different touch points that I've personally benefited from. When I actually sat down and made a list of them, I was like, okay, this is pretty phenomenal. And I should really appreciate that before I'm like, why aren't we doing more and doing it quicker? Because we can and should be. But actually, taking stock of what we have achieved shows that actually we really have made progress, even if it's not been as fast or as widespread as we would have hoped. And also that is acknowledging my privilege as someone who knows how to navigate the system, understands their health, is educated in health, is married to a doctor, and I'm white and middle class. So that does come with inherent privilege and how I navigate that and can access some of those things and I benefit from them. But I think fundamentally it shows that there's steps in the right direction, and that does make me feel excited. Ask me again when they give me a red book and I'm back to paper, but
there's e-read books now. I think it depends on.
Okay, exciting!
Yeah,
I've got
it
all of
depends
that
where
to
you
come.
are. I think it depends where you are, but the e-read book, there've been startups trying to do that for quite a while. The optimism's nice. I think, and great to, as we said at the very start of this, appreciate where we are, how far we have come, the things that have happened. I've been in this game of health tech for a while now, and things look very, very, very different compared to when we started out. And so there is so much to be grateful for. And you're right, like the NHS app and like all of that stuff that you've talked about, and and the devices and software and everything that you'll have encountered along your journey, it's all been change. It's all been change that's had to happen. And I think when you talk about the progress and you talk about that optimism of it, it feels like we're starting to get to a place of change. This year we'd have had so many stories about AI, like so many stories about AI, and we've talked it to death on this podcast, like AI in healthcare. But I think it's got to a point where, if I'm being reflective on like the whole situation and where we are, that I feel kind of similar. One of the criticisms that I've had has always been that we're not being strategic enough about where we're building AI and what we're building it for, because we haven't just optimized where it's going to go. If we decide where it's going to go, then we can really focus on where we build it so that we get the maximum amount of adoption and less wasted energy. And that's broadly been my position. I think, though, that there's definitely value in just the amount of experimentation that is going on from an academic perspective and a research perspective, from, I guess, startups just trying their luck in loads of different places, from, everywhere from the wellness industry upwards, and, AI and pathology now and radiology and like all these different things. There is still value in all of that experimentation, I think, because it is creating this swell of optimism and what is possible, and I guess joy of seeing AI make a change. And it might not be a change that gets so widely adopted, but there's still learning going on as to why or why not. And it seems that as we sit here now on the brink of heading into 2025, that there's so much in the way of that experimentation, and there's so many potential use cases, and there's still obviously so far that we can go from a technological standpoint. GPT-5 on the horizon, and goodness knows what that'll be able to do. ChatGPT Pro going to a load of health tech and biotech researchers for free. That's the $200 a month model that they're clearly, and did clearly in the press release and stuff that they put on the website, make it very clear. They named, I think, 5 of the health tech and biotech researchers that is going to, clearly making a statement that this can be used for healthcare data and in healthcare research. There's a lot that can happen, and that optimism, I think, is a good thing, because that's going to bring more people into the sector and more people trying things and finding more things that will eventually work. And I think whilst I hold the view that we could be far more specific on where we say we want AI, especially where it relates clinically, I think that is I guess where my opinion is being refined into. I think we need to define it clinically, because I think in the research setting, people looking at aging or dementia or all of these things that can use these AI models and do amazing things in the background, it doesn't touch patients and we can be more experimental. I think though clinically, there's going to be a lot of wasted energy in where we're firing AI on the clinical ground floor. So if we could just have some more direction on where we want it and focus everyone to build in those places, knowing it can be adopted, I think we'll get there quicker. But I think there was something in Pigeon this week, wasn't there? Like the MHRA have said, here's 5 things, which is exactly what I'm talking about, by the way.
Yeah, the MHRA have selected 5 AI-powered medical devices for regulatory pilot.
Boom.
There was also another story about all 107 stroke centres in England are using AI technology. Yeah.
So it's happening.
And I think it is happening. I think, as you say, we've talked about AI till we're blue in the face. I actually also just come to the conclusion I don't actually know what AI means anymore. And so, for these stories, I want to know how it's being used. Like, what is it being used? What is the technology? Because that's way more exciting and interesting. I think we learn way more from that than I think we do ourselves a disservice by saying, look how great AI is. So it's just like saying, look how great technology is. And then we end up fixating on the technology rather than the problem it's solving. And we know from everything we've just spent the last however many minutes talking about is that there are big problems to solve, and actually the technology is just the vehicle to do that. And it is exciting. You can't get away from that. But I care more about what it's doing rather than, I don't know. And also some people, as we know, would consider a spreadsheet to be AI. So,
Shots fired. Shots fired. I think, and on that, we might wrap this up. Lots going on in the world of healthcare. We have eyes on the US and what's going on over there. All of those conversations. Who knows how that's going to develop? I think that, as I say, it's not going to go away anytime soon. That stuff. So I'm looking at that with a very keen eye to see how those conversations develop. And it's been a year of certainly women's health, particularly on this podcast, and also AI, whatever the hell that is. But hopefully more of it next year, perhaps more specifically placed, making more impact. This has been Healthtech Pigeon. I should probably say that. If you want to get the newsletter, head to healthtechpigeon.com. Hits your inbox every Sunday. You probably already get it if you're listening to this. We'll see you next year.